You know, if we wanted to have an election system where we didn't just elect the aristocracy every single time, we would ban campaigning. When you run for office, all you should have to do is fill out a campaign form, and then every voter should get a booklet or an audio device or whatever accessibility they need that contains your resume, your platform, and your policies on all the relevant issues, and that for every single candidate, plus a rebuttal that you would then send about every other candidate that's running. For instance, if you were running against an incumbent, you could say, like, this is my platform, and this is what I want to do. I've had these experiences that makes me qualified. And then when you submit your rebuttal for the other candidate, you'd be like, they say they support these things, but if you look at their voting history, they don't actually support these things, so you should vote for me instead. But then, like, you wouldn't need 1 million volunteers, you wouldn't need millions of dollars. There would be completely egalitarian campaigns. Rich, poor, famous, not famous, everyone would have the same access to informing the voters about their platform. And then, like, a state-sponsored debate where the candidates would then have the opportunity to speak and talk about their platform. Our current campaigning system is just a wealth measuring contest. The more wealthy you are, the more name recognition you have, and then you win the election.
They're not. Rednecks aren't conservatives, and they damn sure ain't bootlickers. And no matter how many skinny jean wearing dudes in their lifted half-ton truck blaring Blake Shelton in the mall parking lot try to co-opt the word, it doesn't change the fact that rednecks, by definition, are fucking progressives. See, a bunch of historical revisionists try to pretend that this isn't the case. They'll tell you some bullshit line like the term redneck came from a man working out in the sun all day, bootstrapping his way to a better life with a sunburnt neck. Now, that's a complete load of horseshit. The term originated in the mid to late 1800s, and coal mines were big fucking business. And as with most big business, the people who run them are fucking evil. Back then, they didn't pay coal miners with real money. They basically gave them monopoly money, and it could only be spent at a company-owned store. Because you had to live next to the mine, the company owned all the housing too, so all these people had to rent their houses from the company. This basically made them indentured servants. They had no money to get out from under this structure, out from under the company, and nobody would advocate on their behalf. When they try to advocate on their own behalf by going on strike, the company would literally send armed guards to make them go back to work, or evict them and their families from their company-owned homes with absolutely nothing. By the early part of the 20th century, they decided they had enough, and they decided to start organizing. And to show their unity with one another, they all donned red bandanas around their neck, hence the term redneck. If you were a redneck, you were a pro-labor union progressive. And as their peaceful strikes were met with armed resistance from the coal company and the sheriff, Socialist Party activists started arming the miners. All those idiots on the right who think they're the only ones with guns need to remember 3 little words: under no pretext. I promise you that's not a fucking Reagan quote. See, if you go far enough left, you get your guns back, and that's exactly what happened here. And in 1921, black and white miners joined together. Over 10,000 of them from surrounding mines. They picked up their guns and they marched to Blair Mountain to protest. And when I say protest, I don't mean like a bunch of cosplay treat Gravy Seals crying about their cult leader losing an election, or bootlicking law enforcement for killing unarmed minorities. Nah. These badasses were the real fucking deal. Because standing in their way of their right to assemble, 2,000 cops and militiamen, you know, the alt-right of the time, and some federal troops sent by Warren Harding, who sided with the coal company. And you know what the rednecks did? Well, let's just say they didn't back the blue. They shot the fuckers. They weren't out there simping for government henchmen because they have a hard job. They weren't out there to stand for rich douchebags in big business. They were out there to stack bodies for better pay, better working conditions, and equal treatment of their African-American brethren in the coal mines. They were willing to die to fucking do it. Since the cops and the American government were literally dropping bombs out of airplanes on them and using machine guns against them, a lot of them fucking did die. And they lost the Battle of Blair Mountain, and hundreds of the survivors were prosecuted. But you can thank their sacrifice and the media attention it got for workers' rights and union rights and a lot of the civil rights that we have today. So just remember that rednecks are pro-union, pro-equality, far fucking left socialists, and don't fucking forget it.
Have you ever heard of fishhook theory? See, a lot of people want to talk about horseshoe theory, and this is the idea that if you go far enough left or far enough right, you always wind up at fascism. This idea, first of all, comes from a profound lack of understanding of what fascism is. And this is understandable considering it's a political ideology that is younger than some people. But fascism, by its very nature, is a right-wing ideology. Now, some people will point to the fact that some fascists throughout history started off in left-wing parties and then went over to right-wing and fascist parties. Mussolini is a great example. He started off as a socialist. However, Mussolini, from the beginning of his political career, showed fascist tendencies and ideologies. He worshipped action and violence for the sake of doing them. Very Black Knight energy. And that sort of ideology directly opposes pretty much all leftist theory. And while authoritarianism isn't exclusively fascist, all fascists are exclusively authoritarian. And if you read Umberto Eco's work on the 14 traits of fascism, you will see the difference between left and right-wing authoritarianism. And the thing is, authoritarianism really has nothing to do with where you fall in the political spectrum between left and right. But that's a video for another day. This brings us to centrists and fishhook theory. The dirty trick of the far right is appealing to the centrist. They do this by bombarding you with just the most vile right-wing shit. Just constantly screaming the quiet parts out loud, along with a healthy dose of mis and disinformation. And so by juxtaposition, this makes further right-leaning policy seem more palatable. And so the far-right rhetoric gets further right and the cycle continues. And as the far right gets further right and starts to normalize more and more extremist views, the centrist seeks to find equilibrium, find balance between left and right. And so somebody who would have been considered like just a regular liberal 10 years ago is treated like some kind of radical leftist today because the goalposts have moved so far. And one of the key factors of fascism is appropriating aspects of other movements, thus trying to appeal to the center and curling that right edge back around to the middle, like a fishhook. So the next time somebody asks you why being a centrist is bad, or says something about horseshoe theory, ask them,
Earlier this year, a story went viral of a British man who claims to have fathered 129 children as an unlicensed sperm donor. That man is Clive Jones. Here he is speaking to UK Breakfast Show This Morning in January.
I read in the papers the plight of people out there. These tend to be mainly same-sex couples. There might be a couple who come together where he's perhaps had the snip. And I thought, I mean, for some people, children are very important, as they were for me. And I thought, what a shame. These people come to a stop in their lives where they can't progress any further because, you need this magic stuff to progress further to get for the pregnancy. And I wondered then whether I could help.
And you really have helped a lot of people, 129 people, in fact. It's unbelievable.
Of course, the media frame this as a feel-good story about an altruistic man simply helping people have a family. But this all hits a little different when you find out that Clive is actually a national officer for New British Union, a fascist organisation that has advocated for implementing total Aryanism.
My name is Clive Jones. I'm a member of the New British Union and, I'm an officer for the North East. I recruit for the North East. So if you're from that area, then you'll be talking to me. We're a fascist organisation, a nationalist group operating under fascism. I think I became a fascist with reading up on what fascism was about many years ago, and realised that was for me, what it had to offer.
In an interview with Lad Bible, he speaks about how he hid all of this from his wife, how the women who have given birth from his donation all communicate in a Facebook group, and how he isn't worried that he'll be held liable for child support because he'd claim his rights as a father and get joint custody of the kids, which he says that the mothers do not want, so essentially he's threatening them. Oh, and most tellingly, he says this.
I'd like to share this DNA that I've got, through other babies. I think I'm good DNA, and I'd like to, share that.
Hits a little different indeed.
For the love of God, comrades, stop calling it quiet quitting. It has been and always has been work to rule, a form of protest in which employees do exactly what is stated in their contracts and nothing more in order to slow down production. It has always been a thing. Do not let the fucking elites talk you into thinking that this is bad. You're not quitting your job. You're not doing anything wrong. You are doing exactly what they hired you to do, and they're pissed because you're taking back your power. Don't fucking call it quiet quitting. It's not. You are working to rule.
Anarchists want to abolish the police. But what does that even mean, and how do you prevent crime without them? By solving the circumstances that create crime and prevent them before it happens. Police don't actually prevent crime, they merely respond to it. And of those, only 2% of major crimes are actually stopped. As more police are put on the streets, crimes barely reduce. And in many cases, their presence just makes things worse. Even if you think they're necessary to solve murders, statistically, they don't. The vast majority of crimes that happen are out of necessity. Hungry people steal food to survive. People who are poor are forced into a life of crime to provide for their families. The only solution is prevention, providing food, mental health resources, and other tools they need to heal from the trauma of poverty. This tackles the problem at its root and doesn't just deal with the symptom. Having armed enforcers of the state with the authority to kill and harass you doesn't make society safer, but solving the systemic problems that create crime in the first place does. Safe communities have more resources, not more cops.
Cops can tell in about 30 seconds if you're living in your car, and public parking spaces are not actually public. If you get arrested, your home gets towed. You can't pee in a bush because you're indecently exposing yourself to the leaves, I guess. You can't use the bathroom if you don't pay for something. You can't lay down in the daylight because it is a crime to be horizontal. You can't lay down at night because you are in danger and there is no one to witness your demise. You can't store medication if you don't have climate control. You can't work if you don't have an address. You can't have an address if you don't have pay stubs. Do you understand that homeless people are not targets for cops because they're more morally corrupt than you or they're less like decent people? They're targeted because nobody fucking knows when they disappear!
Rapid fire guide to good goblin imagery versus bad goblin imagery. Anti-Semitic goblin, hook nose, oily slick black hair, and black eyes. All anti-Semitic tropes. Racist goblin has a pig nose, sharp teeth, red-yellow eyes or red-yellow skin, oily black hair, and a top knot, clearly Orientalism inspired. Our first unproblematic goblin is very child plus animal inspired. You're not sure, is it like a cat, bat thing? What's going on here? Some goblin imagery that might be a problem you run into is the sort of poverty porn aspect, where they're tiny, grotesque, and poor people that live off of trash clothing. Otherwise, physically, this goblin is fine. These guys are also goblins. They're little hedge goblins. They're adorable. They got pig noses, but they're fine because it's more on the animal side. This one has a big hook nose, but again, it's so animalistic it just seems more like a beak than a nose. Look at this fuzzy little frog man with antenna. Who could be mad at him? No, nothing problematic here.
Boss makes $1, I make a dime. That was a poem from a simpler time. Now the CEO makes 1,000, and I make $1. Let's steal the catalytic converter out of the company truck.